Hey guys, welcome back to Critical African Thinkers. As you know, this is a place where we examine everything under the microscope of logic to ascertain what is most factual and logically consistent. So today I'm going to be doing a show on the topic how Zionists fall anti-Semitic stereotypes. No, and in this conversation, I'm going to be covering a number of things, one of which is talking generally about anti-Semitism. Then I'm going to be talking about some of the stereotypes, some of the anti-Semitic stereotypes, and outlining how Zionists today are the ones who are perpetuating or foiling such anti-Semitic stereotypes. For example, the stereotype that conflates Jews with Israelis, the stereotypes that talk about Jews having dual loyalty, the stereotypes about blood libels, the stereotype about Jews controlling world governments, the stereotype about Jews controlling the media or even controlling the banking and the financial system. And finally, the stereotypes about Jews being the cause of wars around the world. So, those are the things that we're going to be talking about today. But first, I want to address the fact that anti Semitism is a big problem and it's something that exists, something that currently exists. In one of my most recent show, I talked about how the fact that most of the anti-Semitism I see online are mostly from right-wing sources. Now, my guest on that day, Stanley, said that there was anti-Semitism from the left as well. I was wholly unconvinced with his arguments and with the examples that he gave. Right, I can admit that anti-Semitism from the left cannot be zero, right? But I think the most pernicious forms of it are those that you find around right-wing circles. That's what needs to be dealt with, right? So anti-Semitism is a problem. As much as we want to, want to say that there's been so much of a crying of wolf around the topic of anti-Semitism, it is a problem that needs to be addressed, just like racism, anti-black bigotry, and so many other things. These are things that need to be addressed. However, it does seem like today most of the anti-Semitic stereotypes are being perpetuated or being followed by people who are either Israelis, Jews themselves, or Zionists, most especially Zionists. I mean, they are taking every anti-Semitic stereotype and just putting it on steroids. It's as if they are giving credence, um, they're essentially saying that the anti-Semites of old were correct in certain things that they say. And the first one I want to deal with is the anti-Semitic um, equivocation, or when you conflate Jews and Israelis, right? So when you say anything about Israel, it is seen as saying something about Jews. If you criticize Israel, it's as if you're criticizing Jews, right? And this doesn't leave room. The implication of this is that you are going to make Jews responsible for the actions of Israel. You're going to say everything that Israel does is Jews are responsible for it, even though not all Jews are Israelis. I mean, there are lots of Jews who are not Israeli citizens, right? So when you make that conflation, you're making Jews responsible for the actions of Israel, which in itself is anti-Semitic because these people are not a monolith. They don't have a single political, social ideology. When you make it so, it makes them seem as if they have a single political ideology. And we know that we know what Zionism is about. We know Zionism is about in practice, not what they tell you it's about, creating a home for the Jewish people, right? In practice, it's about dispossession. In practice, it's about kicking Palestinians from their homes, driving them from their homes, killing them, stealing land. That's what it is in practice, right? Instituting an apartheid state. That's what Zionism is in practice. So when you're saying that, which this is something that Israelis are guilty of, when you say Israeli equal to Jews, then you're saying that all Jews are guilty of apartheid. You think you're saying that all Jews are guilty of what happened with the genocide, and they're complicit in the genocide that's currently happening in Palestine. That's essentially what you're saying. But that is not true. Now, the other aspect of this is that the Zionist claim is that Israel is the only place where Jewish people can have safety, which is an indictment on many countries that have significant Jewish populations. The US, for example. Anybody in the US who is parroting such a line is in effect saying that the US is an anti-Semitic place, that the US has not been able to put anti-Semitism under reins, that Jewish people are they are at a peril in the US, that there are significant risks of being attacked in the US itself, right? I'm not talking about, isolated incidents here and there. If the argument is that Israel is the only place where Jews can feel safe, then you've got to ask yourself, what is wrong with all these Western countries that have a Jewish population? Why have they not been able to fix that problem? Why have they not been able to create a safe place where everybody within the states can feel safe, where Jews themselves can feel safe? Why do they need Israel to feel safe? So this in itself is anti-Semitic. It's an indictment. I'll put it that it's an indictment on Western nations, that despite the horrors that Jews went through, they've still not gotten it out of their system to not attack Jews, right? The second part is talking about dual loyalty. Like, if Israel is the country for Jews, then it plays into the anti-Semitic trope of Jews having dual loyalty, or not even having loyalty to their countries of origin or the countries that they stay in, of having their loyalty to a foreign nation. And this was one of the biggest things that it was one of the biggest things that the Nazis propagated at that time, with the international Jewry, that they were trying to control everything. They didn't really have any loyalty to Germany. They were the cause of Germany losing the war. All those nonsense is being perpetuated by this very fact, or by this very thing of claiming that Israel is the only place that Jews can feel safe. If Israel is the only place that Jews can feel safe, then naturally Jews should want to be loyal to Israel wherever they are. And by that, it means they will put the interests of Israel over the interests of the country that they currently live in. Another bullshit anti-Semitic stereotype that is being, perpetuated by Zionists today is that Jews control world governments. I'll play a clip by, I think, David Friedman, who was the former US ambassador to Israel, right? Where he said something about, if we cannot change the hearts and minds of anti-Semites, we can at least put them in jail. We can make their lives miserable. Using the government of different countries, we can make their lives miserable. And this plays into that anti-Semitic stereotype that Jews control world governments. If the interests of Israel can shape the behavior of any country in the world, can shape the behavior of multiple governments in the world, then what are you saying? It's like you're saying, yes, these people actually, remember, they have first made the association between Israeli and Jew, right? They have said that all Jews are Israelis by their admission of saying criticizing Israel is anti-Semitic, or criticizing Israel means you're criticizing Jews, right? So let me just play that clip.
On the right and on the left, I'm an equal opportunity condemner of anti-Semitism.
You're alluding to Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson.
Yeah, none of them are any good. On the right, on the left, I don't like any of these anti-Semites, and I'm not shy about it. But the government, the United States government, or the government of France, or the government of any other country, has the power to rein in anti-Semitism in a much more effective way. And people say, well, the governments are not in the business of changing the way people think. That's true, but, to my thinking, most people who are, anti-Semites, most of these people running around, we're not going to win their hearts and minds, because they don't have hearts and they don't have minds. So, how are we going to, there's no reason to think we're ever going to convince them, but we can deport them, we can put them in jail, we can make their lives miserable, we can cut off their funding, and that's what the Trump administration is doing for the first time.
So, there you go. So, when you look at someone like Candace Owens, I think she's a vile person. I think she's a terrible person, right? I was convinced at the point that she might be anti-Semitic. Well, I'm beginning to change my tune on that. I don't think she is, right? I think she's genuinely appalled by the actions of Israel in Gaza, right? And I think that's what's driving her quote and unquote animosity towards Israel, right? But to say that, given the whole situation, that it's okay to put her in jail, it's okay to ruin her life, it's okay to make her lose her source of income, which they actually did by firing her from the Daily Wire, to say that it's okay to do all that is diabolical. It's evil, right? Because she is just expressing her opinion. Yeah, you don't have to like the opinions of anybody. I don't like Candace Owens. I don't like her opinions. Do I want to see her go to jail when she hasn't committed a crime? No. Same thing with Tucker Carlson. I think he's a vile person as well. I think he has a sinister agenda. Should he go to jail on account of that? He hasn't committed a crime. But this is exactly what the Zionist is saying, that people who do not agree with your ideology, that governments around the world should be able to destroy their lives, should be able to put them in jail at the behest of Israel. That's what it's saying. That's exactly what he's saying. So this idea that Jews or Israel can control world governments to further their political agenda is being perpetrated by Zionists themselves. Another stereotype is the stereotype that Jews control the media. A former US senator I think in Minnesota, in fact, made a shocking confession that he claimed that Jews are the masters of the universe. Oh, we're here, so we can actually control these things. We can shape the narrative, not only in traditional media, but also in the digital media space. So just listen to this.
A majority of Gen Z have an unfavorable impression of Israel. And my friends, I think the reason of that is that we're losing the digital war. Okay, they're getting their information from TikTok and whatever it is, and we're losing that war. When you think about it, the masters of the universe are Jews. You know, we've got Altman and AI, we got Zuckerberg, we got Sergey Brin, we got the whole group across the board. Jan Combs, founded WhatsApp. It's us. And we have to figure out a way to win the digital battle. Amelia, we got to get our digital sneakers on so that the truth can prevail over the lies. And when we do that, the future of Israel will be stronger because a majority of all Americans will support Israel. We'll make that happen. We have to make it happen. Thank you. Baruch Hashem. Thank you.
So imagine an anti-Semite listening to this confession by this Jewish guy, by this Zionist, and he's like, so you're saying I'm right. You're saying that Jews control the media. You're saying they're everywhere in the media. They can shape perception. You're not saying that these people who are critical of Israel, or you're not saying that they're wrong. You're not saying you want to put the truth out there. You're saying you want to shape public opinion with your people, with Jewish people that you have almost everywhere in the media space. You want to shape them in favor of Israel, in favor of the Jewish cause. That's anti-Semitic. That's playing right into the trope. That is diving headfirst into that trope itself. It's crazy that these people don't even know, or they don't see what they're doing. They don't see the implication of what they're doing. They don't see the implication of the sort of things that they are putting out there, that they're perpetrating out there. If Zuckerberg, if Sergey Brin, if Sam Altman, and all these wealthy, powerful Jews in different parts of the media, if they are able to shape public opinion in favor of Israel, artificially manufacture it in favor of Israel, then doesn't it lead credence to that stereotype? Aren't you saying that the anti-Semites are right, that they're correct, that maybe they're not crazy after all? And just recently, the BBC, about 100 journalists from the BBC, wrote a letter where they essentially said that the BBC was being pro-Israel, that their voices were being censored, right? That they wrote a letter. I think I'll just read a couple of passages from the letter. And it says, an open letter to BBC management written by BBC journalists and signed by media industry professionals. A message to the BBC Director General, the Board of Governors, and our BBC colleagues. We're writing to express our concerns over opaque editorial decisions and censorship at the BBC on the reporting of Israel-Palestine. We believe the refusal to broadcast the documentary Gaza, Medics Under Fire is just one in a long line of agenda-driven decisions. It demonstrates once again that the BBC is not reporting without fear or favor when it comes to Israel. We understand that the decision not to broadcast the investigation has been taken by senior BBC management, despite the film's content being signed off in accordance with BBC guidelines and editorial policy. This appears to be a political decision and is not reflective of the journalism in the film. A recent statement from the BBC said broadcasting the film risked creating the perception of partiality. This illustrates precisely what many of us have experienced firsthand, an organization that is crippled by the fear of being perceived as critical of the Israeli government. We are not asking the BBC to take a side. We're asking to be allowed to do our jobs in delivering facts transparently and with due context. For many of us, our efforts have been frustrated by opaque decisions made at senior levels of the BBC without discussion or explanation. Our failures impact audiences. As an organization, we have not offered any significant analysis of the UK's government involvement in the war on Palestinians. We have failed to report on weapon sales or their legal implications. These stories have instead been broken by BBC's competitors. So essentially what these journalists are saying is that the BBC is just simply running pro-Israel propaganda, and so is most of Western media. So is this CNN, Fox News, name them MSNBC, they're all running Israeli propaganda. What does this lead credence to? Again, the Jews control the media. That is what it plays into. This is a documentary signed off by the BBC. Now they do not want to release it because they think that whatever is going to come out of that documentary is not going to be favorable to Israel. Same thing happened with Louis Theroux's documentary, The Settlers. It was pulled down. It was pulled down from mainstream media. And you find these things, you begin to see all these things in, alternative media, or maybe on X, you begin to see them on right-wing spaces, people who have this conspiratorial thinking because you have not allowed information to flow on the normal channels. And when you begin to see these things with those right-wing anti-Semitic knots, you are just lending credence to what they're saying, because what they're now sharing, these things that you've censored because they're critical of Israel, has elements of truth in them. So in essence, what you're doing is what you're perpetuating that myth. Another myth or another stereotype that the actions of Zionists is currently perpetuating, as Jews are responsible for wars worldwide. The world came close to a major conflagration in the Middle East following Israel's attack on Iran, as Netanyahu and the Zionist government in Israel wanted or tried to drag the US into that war with Iran, which would have had major repercussions for the region and maybe other parts of the world. I mean, if that had happened, if the US had not pulled back, if the US had gone, if Iran itself did not try to de-escalate tensions, then they're probably looking at a much more bigger conflict being caused by Israel. One single tiny nation attacking everybody around it. The same nation whose prime minister said that the US is easily manipulated. You can push them in the particular direction that you want them to be pushed to. So what does this play into? What does it play into? It is crazy that those who are supposed to be much more concerned about anti-Semitism are the ones who are giving it life, who are perpetuating it, who are giving credence to these stereotypes. They are the ones who are at the forefront today because of some weird, twisted, ideology, because of they want to justify the dehumanization of a people, because they want to institute an apartheid state to take rights away from other human beings, to prevent them from living as people with rights, with a functioning government, to prevent them from being able to vote, to prevent them from being able to bring their cause before a court of competent jurisdiction when they have issues with their Jewish neighbors. And you make this about Jews, and you are surprised when people blame Jews for these actions. And you can't eat your cake and have it. You can't choose at this point in time. You have to go all in. And they're choosing to go all in different directions that are bad. At the same time, you've got to give them credit for that. But it doesn't make any sense. And this has to stop. Israel is a country. Israel is a country that is carrying out a genocide against Palestinians. And calling that out isn't as anti-Semitic. And, trying to socially engineer world political machinery, the media, trying to gaslight the world into thinking that, criticizing Israel is anti-Semitism is in itself anti-Semitism. Because there are many Jews all over the world who are very critical of Israel, who do not like what Israel is doing, and they are speaking out. Don't their voices matter? Of course, their voices matter, but they are being put at the back. They're being ostracized, and if even possible, they are being called anti-Semitic themselves. So being a Jew doesn't even shield you from that label of anti-Semitism. It doesn't shield you. This is the actions of a government, of a foreign government, that has refused to act like a sane and rational entity that is belligerent. It has to stop at a certain point in time. And it just feels like this is the only thing Israel can do. It cannot engage in diplomacy. It cannot be less radical. It cannot be logical. It's just going to attack. But if it wants and if it has to survive, then it needs to change its strategy. It needs to make peace. It needs to live up to its claim that it is the only democracy in the Middle East, which it isn't. It needs to live up to that claim that it's, human rights and all other things. It currently is not living up to those things. And asking for Israel to live up to those things isn't anti-Semitic. It's actually in the best interests of Israel. But there are those who continue to defend the current dastardly actions of a genocidal state, which is not in its interest. There are those who will continue to perpetuate those myths and those stereotypes, which is not in Israel's benefit, and they claim to be for Israel. So if Israel wants to survive, it wants to succeed, then it needs to wisen up to those who are doing it the most damage within its society and outside. Anyway, that's it for today. Like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in another live stream. Bye for now.